All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Hakodash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders, a great millstone. Peace and salutation to the Akim, to the elect that are scattered throughout the four corners of this earth, pushing this truth and faith and sincerity. I'm the brother Shamala from the GMS Houston camp. In this lesson, I'm going to be going into a couple of verses in Galatians, the fourth chapter. All right, with some precepts along with that. All right, and the title actually is "But when the fullness of the time was come." All right, quoting Galatians, 4:4. All right, but without further ado, let's get into it. And hopefully it's edifying. This is Galatians 4:1. It says, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differs nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is on the tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father." And then, let's just say you have, a son that is destined. Let's say he's destined to be king or something like that, and he's going to become. He's obviously the heir, right? The firstborn son, and he's going to inherit the kingdom. He has to come up under tutors and people that's guiding him. How to be. How to act. Building up his character. Decision making. All of these things, right, to prepare him to be in a position, right, that he's going to be in as far as being a king. And you can't just come into the kingdom, without being prepared for that, right? Everything, can go to hell. So you have to be brought up in a particular way. And while, he's being brought up, right, he's not in that authority, so to speak, until he is, ready for that, right? So it's different, nothing from a servant. All right, because you ain't came into the full authority and the rights of that inheritance yet. All right, you got to be trained up. But it says, even so, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. All right, and now you think about during this time. All right, Paul was visiting the church, of Galatia, which that was Asia Minor. All right, which is today modern day Turkey. All right, he visited the churches, out in Galatia, to teach the Israelites living up in there. All right, which, this book was written in Greek. All right, because that was the language that they spoke. Okay, so you had Israelites living up in there. And when you go to Galatians, the first chapter, all right, which I'll grab that as well. But you had those Israelites basically saying that they could not receive salvation unless they kept the law. They had to keep the law perfectly. And, that's how basically they were teaching them that this is, how they were going to be saved. But when Paul went unto them, he basically explained the death of Yahweh and what that meant. But you had these guys that were getting in their ear, about the law. Okay. And this is what, we were in bondage to, as far as trying to, keep it that way, as far as getting our righteousness and salvation from the law, all right, or whether it was the Gentiles, right, the Israelite foreigners, right, they were in bondage to whatever they were following, all right, whether it's pagan gods or whatever the traditions they came up in, all right. But continuing on, it says, "But when the fullness of the time was come, the Most High sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law." Now, who is this talking about? Just talking about Yahweh Shai, right? When the fullness of the time was come, meaning when it was ready, right? Because the Most High has certain prophecies, right? And they don't come to pass until He's ready for it to come to pass. They all have, an appointed time. Okay, so now this is talking about Yahweh Shai, right? It's just the Most High sent forth His Son, made of a woman, all right? Talking about, Mary, all right, made under the law, because He was subject unto the law. When you read in Leviticus 12, right, and you read about the birth of a male child, right, how he had to be circumcised, You know how they got to go to the temple. You know how they got to give a particular sacrifice, right? He kept that. All right. And even going to what Jerusalem, what was it, yearly, I believe, all the way to 12, something like that. All right. But yeah, so he was made under the law to redeem them that were under the law, you know, that we might receive, you know, the adoption of sons. So he says he came to redeem them that were under the law. Now, who under the law? Who were the law given to? All right, the Israelites. When Moses gave the law, only the Israelites were there. All right, there was no other nation that entered into that covenant. So the Israelites, right, which today are the Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, right, they make up the chosen people of the Heavenly Father. They received that. All right, we received that. Okay, so we needed to be redeemed. All right, from what? From the curse of the law, not being able to keep it perfectly. Okay, and that's what Yahweh Shai, you know, died for. When you read in the third chapter, right? He redeemed us from the curse of the law, so that the blessings of Abraham can come upon us. But it says that we might receive the adoption of sons. All right, and why, you know, did we have to get adopted? All right, because the Most High basically, you know, cast us off as a people from not keeping the law, statutes, and commandments. When you go to what is it, Hebrews 8:7, for if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for. Should not. I think I should start. No, I can start here. Hebrews 8:7, for if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. For finding fault with them, you see, so the fault was with us. Nothing was wrong with the law. The law was perfect. It was just us being in this flesh and not being able to keep the law perfectly. All right, so something had to happen. Something else, you know, had to take place for us to get right with the Heavenly Father. And the answer was Yahushua. But it says, for finding fault with them, he said, behold, the days come, said the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. All right, so the new covenant will be made with the Israelites, just like the old covenant was. But it says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continue not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, said the Lord. So it says it's not going to be according, like the same way that we received that old covenant, it's not going to be that. Then he says that they continue not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, right? Meaning that he cast us off. When you read in Hosea, the first chapter, all right, when it says that ye are not my people because of our disobedience. All right. So the we're not going to receive, right, the new covenant as the old covenant was. When you have to write it down and or you have to read it, oh, thou shalt not do this or thou shalt not do that. No. But this time, you know, it's going to be written within us. So we're going to know to keep this, or we're going to know how to do it perfectly. We're not going to have to read it. All right. We're going to be programmed by the Heavenly Father to keep it 100%. All right. So this is how it's going to differ from the old covenant. But let's go back. Galatians 4:6. It says, it's because you are sons, the Most High sent forth the Spirit of His Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Right. This is why we had this understanding, because the Spirit, you know, was sent down. Right. And we understand, you know, the Heavenly Father and His Son. We receive the names, we receive this truth. So wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son, and if a son, then an heir of the Most High through Yahushua. Howbeit then, when ye knew not the Most High, ye did service unto them by nature, are no gods, right? And going into idol worship. Okay, and that's how we were before we came into this truth. All right, we were living after the ways of the world, however we were raised. You might have had a family that went to church every Sunday, right? You celebrating Easter and all these particular things. All right, all of that's idol worship, right? If you didn't know, all right, but you know, this is how we grew up. All right, this is what we did when we didn't know, right, about being an Israelite. But it says, but now, after that ye have known the Most High, or rather are known of the Most High, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire to be in bondage, right? And this is talking about the law, all right? Because the men that were talking to them about the law were getting in their heads, all right? Because when you go to Galatians, the first chapter, right, it says Galatians 1:6, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Yahushai, right, into another gospel. It said, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and will pervert the gospel of Yahushua. All right. So this is what they were doing. They were perverting the gospel by teaching something other than what Paul taught, which was the truth. All right, which was basically the salvation by faith. All right. And then when you go to the second chapter, I think it's actually the third. Let's see. Right, Galatians 3:1. Oh, foolishness, Galatians, who have bewitched you that ye should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Yahushua had been evidently set forth crucified among you. So he said, who have bewitched you or put a spell on you, right, to believe in this, this crazy BS. Because basically saying, look, I basically laid everything out for you. I taught you everything plainly, right? And basically the way that he taught, it's as if they actually experienced all of these things that, Yahweh's death and everything, right? So he laid everything out for him, right? The truth. But it says, this only what I learned of you, receive you the spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith, right? And it was of faith that we received the spirit. It wasn't about, doing the law. The law didn't give us that. All right. We always heard about the laws. All right. Even though we probably didn't delve too deep into them, but we always knew about the law. All right. The 10 commandments, right? The Lord didn't send down the spirit based on that. All right. So this only what I learned of you, receive ye the spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith. Are you so foolish? Having begun in the spirit, are ye now made perfect by the flesh? Have you suffered so many things in vain, if it be yet in vain? He therefore that ministered to you the spirit and worked miracles among you, doeth he it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith, right? It's faith. Even as Abraham believed the Most High, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Okay, so that's how we get our righteousness. All right, through faith in Yahushua. All right, it's all faith based, and that's not doing away with the law. That's why when you go to Galatians 2 and let's see, 16 says, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law. All right, what does justified means? Being made righteous, right? Through that way. When you get this Greek word right here,
Strong's G 1344. Dikaiao.
right? And it goes into to render righteous, right? One to be righteous, to declare, pronounce, one to be just. All right. So innocent. So the law is not what's going to do that. The law is not going to make you guiltless before the Heavenly Father. It says, but by faith of Yahushua. So that's what's gonna do it. All right, because Yahushua is the Lamb of the Most High. Yahushua kept the law perfectly. So just believing in Him, you are covered. But that does not mean that we don't keep the law, though. But it says, even we have believed in Yahushua that we might be justified by the faith of Yahushua, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. All right, this is what he's explaining to them. Nobody's going to be justified by the works of the law. It has to be through Yahushua. Okay, he's trying to get them to focus, on the bigger picture and understanding the death and the sacrifice of Yahushua and what it meant. But if while we seek to be justified by Yahushua, we ourselves also are found sinners, is therefore Yahushua the man of sin, the Most High forbid. So we are seeking to be justified by Yahushua and not the law. All right. So it would seem like we are teaching people just to be sinners, right? But that ain't what we saying, all right? Because we still gonna go off, right? Even though we're seeking to be justified by Yahweh Shai. But it says that Yahweh Shai, the minister of sin, most I forbid, because Yahweh Shai covers that. So technically, you know, we are not sinning through him, all right, even though it would seem that way, all right, but we are not, all right, because we are saying, we don't got to keep it perfectly. Other people, would hear that and like we disregarding it, right? But that's not the case. Okay, Yahweh Shai is the most important thing, the most important aspect of our salvation that we got to focus on. That's why when you had the transfiguration, was that in Matthew 17, you had Elijah and Moses appear, which represented the law and the prophets. But after that, Yahweh Shai was standing there alone, right? And the Most High said from a voice from heaven, "Hear ye him." So Yahweh Shai is over that. But it says, "For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor." Right? Talking about the law. All right. So if you make it about that, then you are a transgressor. You are sinful. And Paul even went into how that he was a Pharisee of the Pharisee or the Hebrew of the Hebrews. Nobody was keeping it like him. All right. Hey, he was all into it. All right. But then he understood that, damn, he wouldn't even, it's not do that. All right. So he changed his belief. So he says, "For I through the law am dead to the law that I might live unto the Most High." Right. Dead to that old way of having to keep it perfectly, and righteousness and salvation got to come through that. All right. We don't have to do that anymore because of the death of Yahweh. He said, "I am crucified with Yahweh." So when Yahweh was crucified, right, we were crucified with him. Right? And Paul even speaks about raising up and walking in the newness of life. And this is part of that newness. "Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Yahweh shall live within me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of the Most High, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not frustrate the grace of the Most High. For if righteousness come by the law, then Yahweh is dead in vain." So he said, "I do not frustrate the grace." All right, now let's look at this word frustrate.
Strong's G 114. Atheteo. Atheteo.
Right, to do away with, to set aside, disregard, nullify, make void, reject. Right, I don't reject the grace or do away with the grace. All right. But it says, "For if righteousness come by the law, then Yahweh is dead in vain." So if righteousness comes by the law, then it's like Yahweh came for nothing. If we can get righteousness through that way, right, then it's like Yahweh he died and he came and been a sacrifice for nothing. What was his purpose of coming? The whole purpose was coming for him to save us from that, because there were no other way. There were no other sacrifice to get us back into the good graces of the Heavenly Father. So Yahweh came and he was that. And this is what he's trying to get them to understand. All right, we don't got to do that. So y'all letting these dudes get in y'all head. All right, they don't know what the hell they talking about. All right, I ended off on Romans 10 and 3. 2. "For I bear no record that they have a zeal of the Most High, but not according to knowledge." Right, and a lot of our people be having that zeal, but they don't be knowing what they talking about. All right, they say that they believe in the Heavenly Father, they believe in this and that, right? But they don't do it in truth. It says, "For they, being ignorant of the Most High's righteousness and going to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of the Most High." So you got people establishing their own righteousness. You got people that try to uphold the law as something that you got to keep for salvation, and making that just so important. All right, and that shouldn't be the case, because it says, "and not have submitted themselves unto the righteousness of the Most High." And who is the righteousness of the Most High? Yahweh. For it says, "For Yahweh is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth." So Yahweh is how you get the righteousness. All right, that's why I say he's the end of the law for righteousness. All right, so you want righteousness, it's believing in him. Okay, Let's see. See if there's anything else in here that I can think about. Romans 3. Romans 3:20. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin, right? The law shows you that you ain't right, basically. But now the righteousness of the Most High without the law is manifested. So it's a righteousness that can come without the law now, right? And it wasn't so before. It says being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Even the righteousness of the Most High, which is what? Which is by faith of Yahushua unto all and upon all that believe, for there is no difference, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of the Most High, which is talking about, the Israelites, because only the Israelites can sin, because only the Israelites received the law, right? Because sin simply means the breaking of the laws. That's all that it means. So if you wasn't given the law, you can't sin. So this is talking about the Israelites. But it says, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Yahushua. So now we are justified by that grace and that faith, along with keeping the law as well. All right. It's just knowing that salvation is going to come through your faith in him, not by works, right? The works of the law. All right. But, that's a lesson. I'll just verify. With that, I'm going to say shalom.